Alrighty guys, this is Snugs on Blitz, and I'm back with another video for you today. So I think it's important that we ask the question, what tier should you play? After all, there are 10 tiers. Now some people love to play tier 10, and other people love to play, well, other tiers. So I'm going to share with you my opinion on what tier I think you should play and why. Now we're looking at the Soviet tech tree here, but pretty much all the lines are the same, in the sense that Tiers 1, 2, and 3 consist of 1 tank each. Then Tier 4 you get 2 tanks, and Tier 5 you get 3. And then suddenly from Tier 6 you get more variety. And then Tier 7's where it really takes off. And this is true for all the lines, whether you're playing American, Soviet, Russian, or French. This wasn't always the case. There was a time where Tiers 2 through 5 were filled with many exciting and fun, crazy tanks. The problem was that the grind took ages. So Wargaming made the decision to get rid of them and make it faster for people to get up to the higher tiers. That's both good news and bad news. Good in the sense that you can get to the tanks you want faster, and bad because you're really not ready to play them. What I'm going to do is go through the tiers and tell you why I think you should play each tier or not. Now please understand, I'm skipping tiers 1 to 4 because they're pretty much irrelevant for this discussion, because there's just not much interest in those tiers. So let's jump right in at Tier 5. In Tier 5, there suddenly becomes a difference in playstyle of the tanks. Below this tier, the tanks play very similarly thanks to the lack of variety of tanks. And so because of that, you can't get a true understanding of how to play in the higher tiers. But from Tier 5, there are numerous tanks, and each tank has their dedicated duty, from light to mediums to heavy tanks and tank destroyers. And so with that, you'll start to understand how to apply these strategies to the higher tiers. And that's really necessary as you move up. If you don't master it in Tier 5, you're not going to be able to do it in Tier 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's a tier where you can earn a lot of credits quite easily that will allow you to buy the tanks that you really want in the higher tiers and help you earn experience that you need to get the gun and equipment for those higher tier tanks in. So this is where I suggest newer players focus at first. If you can master this tier, you should do well in the next tier up. But if you can't do well in this tier, I think you're going to struggle massively all the way through. So if you find yourself struggling in Tier 10, go back to Tier 5 and 6 where there are not that many pro players. Most players are new like yourself, and you can just test out your skill set and see how to win the game. If you can win in this tier, then you can start to apply those principles to the next tier up, and so on and so forth. So, Tier 5, that's what I got for you. Moving on to Tier 6. Now personally, I've played a lot of games, so for me, Tiers 5 and under really don't offer me enough enjoyable gameplay. They're just boring. Do I play them? Well, yes, sometimes, because they're easy to complete certain events with. But for me, Tier 6 is where the fun really starts to happen. Half the time you'll be top tier, half the time you'll be lower tier. But in order to be good at this game, you have to learn how to be able to perform even as a lower tier tank. And I think Tier 6 will really test you, because you'll have tanks that are tougher than you, stronger than you, have bigger guns than you, but can you do the top damage? Can you take out these higher tier tanks? I think this is where it really starts to become a challenge. And it's really enjoyable, actually, thanks to the variety of tanks. And I think this is really the key tier for training in order to be better at the higher tiers. If you're not doing well in Tiers 8, 9, and 10, go back to this tier and just start winning. Learn how to dominate, especially when you're top tier. Now, lower tier, okay, not so much, but if you can, good for you. Not only do you learn how to play against a variety of tanks, but you'll also be able to earn a ton of credits to be able to afford those higher tier tanks, as well as earn free XP to be able to equip your tanks with a gun before you get shredded. So this is something to bear in mind. Tier 6. I enjoy it. and I don't think you should overlook it. It is a fun tier. Moving on to tier 7. Now it gets interesting. There are a lot of great tanks in this tier that are so much fun to play. Unfortunately, it consists of two of the strongest tanks in the entire game, the Smasher and the Annie. So if you run across them, it can be rough. But if you find yourself in a game without those tanks, it is a thoroughly enjoyable tier, in my opinion. Most of the good players I know are happy to play tier 7 through 10. Now there are those people who only want to play tier 10, I know that. But I think they're missing out a whole lot of fun in these lower tiers. You're not top tier. It is a challenge sometimes because you are fighting against stronger tanks with more hit points and bigger guns. But it is fun. There are so many different types of tanks here because you're playing against tier 6, which is full of collectible tanks, as well as tier 8, which has the most gold tanks in the game. This translates into an incredibly diverse and enjoyable gameplay, in my opinion. So, that's tier 7 for you. Just hope that you don't run across an Annie and a Smasher. They're just so overpowered. However, if you take those two tanks out of the mix, I think tier 7 is one of the most balanced tiers in the game. It's a lot of fun, and I think if you're not playing this tier, you're missing out. Moving on to tier 8. What can I say about tier 8? It's the credit grinding tier. If you want to make credits and have a variety of gameplay, this is the tier for you. Back in the day, earning credits was a pain. So you wanted to get yourself a good gold tank in tier 8, and then you would just print yourself credits. There's a reason why I have most of my games in tier 8, and that's because I figure, hey, I can enjoy this tier as much as tier 10 or tier 9 or tier 7, but there's a lot of different gold tanks that allow me to earn a bunch of credits in the process. Yes, there are some tanks that are OP, but there are a whole heap of tanks to choose from, and you can enjoy a varied playstyle and a variety of lineups that make this tier extremely fun and unpredictable. You'll have good players, you'll have bad players, you'll have strong tanks, weak tanks, you'll be lower tier, you'll be higher tier. You can fight against the Smashers and the Annie and not get obliterated. It's a very fun tier, and in my opinion, probably the most enjoyable overall. I said enjoyable, not challenging, not testing your skill set, just for pure enjoyment. I think this is the tier because not only can you have fun, it's unpredictable because of all the different tanks that are involved, but also you can make a ton of credits in the process. Okay, so moving on to tier 9. Now, in my opinion, and that of a few of my buddies, tier 9 is probably the most balanced tier in the game. There are no Smashers, there are no Annies, there are no super OP tanks. Yes, there are some OP tanks, but they're not super OP that the tech tree tanks can't perform against them. Every tank can do well in this tier, and there's not many tanks that really need to be reworked because they're just so evenly balanced. It's a great tier. I think this is probably the most fun tier in the game because you're going against tier 8, which has all those tanks. You're testing yourself against tier 10, and you're able to compete against practically every one of the tier 10 tanks, no matter what tier 9 tank you choose. So, yeah, tier 9 is quite simply a fantastic. I think the great thing about this tier is when you're tier 9 and you're playing against tier 10s, people don't expect you to carry, but you can. And you can actually dominate even with a tier 9 tank against tier 10 tanks. They're that good. There are some tanks in this tier, they're tier 9, but they play better than their tier 10 counterparts. I really do believe that. So, tier 9, I think probably the most fun tier in the game, bar none. And you're going to come across a lot of great players in this tier, but that's what challenges you. So, that's tier 9 for you. go for it. This is where you're really starting to test how good you really are. And of course, moving on to the climax, the tier 10. This is what every player wants when they join this game. They want the 183 boomstick. They want the invisible grill sniping tank. They want the TVP. They want the super conch. They want the E100 bruiser. They want to do 800 damage in a single shot. They just want to obliterate their opponents. They want to compete with the best of the best. That's what everybody wants. And the truth is, it's a great tier. And Wargaming knows this, so they work hard to make sure the tanks are competitive and not super OP. Yes, from time to time you'll have a new tank that's just a little bit too heavily cooked, but that's what everybody wants. They want the tier 10 tanks. They want to be able to dominate the tier 9 tanks. They're at the top. They've got the biggest guns, the most armor, the most hit points. The tough thing with tier 10 is if you're not a good player, you're gonna come across a lot of great players and you are going to get obliterated. Not only will you get obliterated, but you will get blamed a lot. Pro players don't like getting vaporized because their team sucks really bad. So pro players will rage and say, what are you doing this tier? You're a fool. You don't know what you're doing. Get out of tier 10. And part of me says, yeah, if you're getting your ass kicked and barely doing any damage, and you don't know the maps, you don't know what to do, you really need to go down a little bit and learn how to use these tanks before you come back. I'll be honest, when I started out, my first tier 10 tank was a T62, and I got obliterated. My stats were horrible in the tank. I was a 43% player, and yet in tier 7 and 8, I was a 55% player, 52%. But tier 10 was an enigma for me. I was struggling so hard. And I think good players knew I didn't know how to play because they saw me out of position. They saw that I was too aggressive, and they would take advantage of it. So tier 10 is really when you're ready to play this game. You don't want to go up too early. You can try it, but in my opinion, if you've got those big tanks, have fun in special modes with them. Learn how to play them in special modes, but don't play this regularly in tier 10 if you don't know how to play it, because people will rage and people will get upset because why are you here if you have no clue what you're doing? You're playing a T62 as a front heavy, or you're playing a grill front line. I mean, if you're a great player, that's okay, but if you don't know how to play, you're going to get obliterated and your team is not going to be happy. So, that's all I got for you. So in a nutshell, tiers 1 to 4 don't offer enough variety for you to learn how to play. It's not interesting, and you won't learn enough to play in the higher tiers. Tier 5, that's where things start to get interesting. But again, you really don't have enough variety to know how to play all the tanks. Tier 6, that's where things really start to get interesting, and you have to adjust. If you're higher tier, you should play more aggressive. If you're lower tier, play more passive. This is an important skill to learn. But it's tiers 7 through 10 where you really learn how to play this game. Use tiers 5 and 6 as your training ground to learn how to play, and move up slowly through the tiers, and you'll enjoy the game a whole lot more. So, that's all I got for you. What tier are you going to be playing? I'll see you next time. Snugs on Blitz.